Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Future Engineering Bets. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Dan Fung of the APC. He's the Head of Strategy and Performance at the APC, which is the Advanced Propulsion Centre.
I think that recently with the war in Iran, there has been a much greater interest recently in EVs. So at the end of last year, we were sitting about 22% penetration of EVs into new car sales. That's rocketed up to 29%.
What would be the point in investing in automotive battery factories when China can just keep driving down price? Are we better investing in things that aren't so easily done by China?
What we're seeing the Chinese automakers do is they'll release something. They'll see how the market responds to it. If it's not good enough, they will re-release a new model. 12 months later, they'll improve, they'll innovate.
If you're in private equity and you're an investor or you're a shareholder in those companies, you're trying to think, well, we all thought we were going this way, but all of a sudden we're not. You know, you've got a lot of companies in Europe now saying, well, we're going to carry on producing diesel cars and petrol cars longer. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Future Engineering Bets, where we look at where innovation and capital allocation in advanced engineering is going to go in the future. Electrification and decarbonisation is a massive interest subject, and I'm very pleased today to be joined by Dan Fung of the APC. He's the Head of Strategy and Performance at the APC, which is the Advanced Propulsion Centre. And Dan's involved in all kinds of projects distributing funds into developing SMEs. So Dan, thank you for joining us. Do you want to explain to people a bit about what it is that you do?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Fred, and for the introduction. Yeah, so the Advanced Propulsion Centre was founded in 2013 to support the UK's automotive industry in developing new products, in getting those products to market, and ultimately reducing carbon and creating jobs in the UK, encouraging overseas investment into our manufacturing ecosystem. And we were pleased last year to have been awarded a further £4 billion to deploy over the next 10 years to continue that transition to zero-emission vehicles, to anchor manufacturers here, to enable new vehicle technologies to be developed.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. And we're going to dive into a whole bunch of challenges that the UK faces. What's been, would you say, the busiest part of your last year?
I would say the biggest part is launching a new funding round. We're funded by the Department for Business and Trade and Government. They have worked with us, with the automotive industry, to figure out what is needed over the next 10 years compared to what we've been funding over the past 10 years or so. And so adjusting our messaging, adjusting where our focus lies has been a huge amount of work. And in the 12 months that we've been deploying Drive 35 funding, we've supported over 140 organisations, deployed £180 million, all across the industry, from startup and scale-up companies through to academia, through to large OEMs looking to develop, to grow their manufacturing footprint. So that's definitely been what our biggest challenge has been. How do we get the money out to the right places with the most impact?
That's a really big question, this one, isn't it? Because as somebody who's worked in many an innovation project in the past and things like hydrogen fuel cells and electric vehicles, turning investment into actual commercial gain and footprint and therefore jobs and growth and everything is the key question, isn't it? Which I'm going to get onto. So today's subject matter, Dan, is industrial strategy or industrial risk and the UK's real position. So I think it's getting into that frank sort of discussion around, okay, there's what we're doing, but where are we at? And when we look at some of the research and some of the things that you cite, Dan, is the UK is advanced when it comes to R&D and innovation. We rank well out above our sort of population size in terms of what we do. I think quotes things like 12% of global research is cited to the UK. So we have a good hit on IP. We know we've got Formula One. We know we've got lots of innovative things, but we don't scale. We don't turn that into mass manufacturing, and therefore potentially other people pick up on a lot of that. What's the APC's view on that? And I know that that's a lot of what the Drive 35 is for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Drive 35 has three areas: innovation, scale-up, and transformation. So innovation, R&D. Transformation is about putting capital down, supporting places to build facilities in the UK. Scale Up was a pilot that's designed to address that exact problem that you talk about, Fred. It's this problem that we invent stuff in the UK, we're great at the R&D, but it goes elsewhere. And rather than just carry on getting bogged down into this sort of Groundhog Day of conversation over conversation about, oh, the UK isn't a great place to scale, we decided to work with government to try and figure out how we could try to fix this. So we launched the Scale Up Fund in order to create a funding mechanism that, rather than detracted private investment, could work with private investment into organizations that had done something unique, something different, something that gave them a chance to grow. And over the past year, we've had an incredible demand for that. We've seen some fantastic innovation companies come in, apply for this funding, and yeah, we've all been surprised at the levels of engagement with this. We're very much looking forward to seeing what the outcomes from these are. We're very confident, and as soon as those are released, we'll be plastering those over our social medias because we're so proud of what UK companies are doing and embracing this challenge.
And I know that the sentiment behind these programs is always so positive, and it's amazing to be involved. On the flip side, I suppose when you're looking at the size of each particular grant going out, and looking at the kind of companies involved, the reality is it's difficult to say if the money is really going to make the difference on the scale up, because it's easy to consume the money and then still not see the commercialization. And also being familiar that some companies have been chugging away in an R&D phase, pre-commercialization, often for 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And they're still claiming grants, they're still doing the jobs, and the funding is meant to help grow. Where do you sit in terms of that? For me, I look at it and think, are we really, really focused on measuring the commercial gain from these grants and making sure that that feeds back in a sort of cycle loop of learning into future funding, or do we not track it, and where does that go?
No, absolutely. We definitely see some organizations that repeatedly come in for funding and they're requesting it. We run a competitive process. So each of our funding rounds, we're typically oversubscribed by more than double the amount of funding available with high quality projects. And that means that companies that we see coming back in, and if somebody hasn't been able to industrialize a technology, our focus is on late stage research and development. We're not doing sort of really interesting early stage blue sky thinking. Anybody that comes in for funding to us has to have a clear route to market and a clear path to commercialization. So being all of that combined, being oversubscribed with high quality projects, being late stage R&D, we can quite quickly see the companies that might be just trying to apply for their OPEX cost maybe, or not really move the needle on the innovation that they're asking for, versus the ones that are truly doing something that's internationally special, something that other countries, other industries aren't able to do. So yes, absolutely, always a risk. We're acutely aware that we are giving away taxpayer money to big companies. And I know my colleagues at APC wouldn't be able to be so passionate about the job they do if they thought that the money was just going to sort of bolster somebody's private funds or just keep a few people productive that otherwise wouldn't be there. We're very passionate about the impacts that we see from across the programs.
Yeah. Is it measured post funding? Do we track 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the line to see what funding difference made?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do a lot on data collection, on analysis. So at an application stage, any company that comes in for our big funds, we're funding £5 to £25 million of grant funding, of government money into these companies. There's a lot of scrutiny that gets put on from technical assessors, from economic assessors in government, and then finally through to awards. So it's not an easy process. There's a lot of rigor that gives confidence that we're setting the projects out with the right intent. Then each year through the project, there's reviews, there's checking of the business case. We engage with various senior levels within the businesses that are being funded to ensure that their strategy still aligns with the work that's been done, that the partners in the business, in the collaboration, are still gaining benefits that they were expecting to gain. And then all government funding is subject to independent analysis. So external companies are contracted by government to come and look at the projects that we've funded and to map those benefits. And we've just had one such report published showing a sort of ratio of about 5+. So every pound of government money gives about £5 benefit back to the economy through the programs that we funded.
Well, that's great, isn't it? That's a great return. Yeah.
Really
You do that with
pleased.
every pound spent.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean,
absolutely.
I'd like to invest my own money in that, to be honest.
I would indeed. I would indeed then. So, okay, so the UK, we're good at designing things. We're not so good at scaling up. We don't struggle for innovation ideas, I think, as a nation, do we? And you're probably surrounded by it all day, every day, like you say, oversubscribed for funding. Where do we see the challenge lying in terms of that scale up? Because is it practical experience? Obviously, there's capital need to scale up, but you've got to have something scalable. And that requires a lot of professionalization often that's just simply missing in the smaller SMEs, particularly if they're from an academic background.
Yeah. So what's missing, or what's the challenge? Operate in a global marketplace. The automotive industry around the world is hugely productive. It has a lot of sort of multiplication benefits across the economy. So it's not just, let's say, the assembly of cars. It's the people to clean the factories, to make machinery, to train staff. And that's just within the OEMs. And then there's a bunch of supply chain that only really works if it's close to the vehicle assembly lines. So there's stuff that's difficult to ship. It's expensive to ship. You have to have steel companies capable of pressing panels, of making seats and interiors that, again, are really bulky to ship. And then that sort of cascades into the wider supply chain. So countries want automotive because it's very well studied that it has a big multiplication effect in the economy. And therefore, when you've got a credible automotive product or a credible technology, we are competing with other countries around the world for attracting that technology. And some places will effectively put a huge pile of cash on the table. And that cash could look like graded land. We'll offer to build your factory. We'll plumb it in. We'll give you a deep water port. There's a lot of attractive places around. There's other places that will say, hey, they'll offer a different package of benefits. What the UK offers, playing by the rules, playing by subsidy control rules that previously we were subject to as part of the EU, but now we have subsidy control to meet other state aid type rules. We generally offer this connection to a great innovation environment. We offer skills that move across from adjacent industries. Motorsport, for example, great place to develop, to research, to innovate. People that have come from motorsport are really quite attractive to an R&D company because their end product is a prototype. The thing that races around a track is a prototype. Having that skill set of thinking differently, bringing ideas in from other areas, making things quickly and beating others to that challenge are definitely all things that help us land jobs in the UK, land capability in the UK. But it's not easy and it's competitive.
Would you say, knowing what you know, and obviously there's the government legislation, there's the different landscapes for the capital investors, automotive is particularly capital intensive to set up, to supply vehicles over a 5-6 year period. A lot of people outside the automotive wouldn't realize just how much investment goes in. But do we feel, in terms of governments, that they appreciate the competitive edge needed to become a manufacturer? Because that's one of the questions we're talking about here. If we're going to scale up, how do we end up manufacturing in more ways than we are currently, whilst you're also bringing in, and let's talk about it, China, for example, not on the battery side, but as a manufacturer of automotive cars, is going to be a huge competitor. I feel there's a part of it that's just to get competitive engineering and drive it forward into scale up is something we're not the best at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, China have had decades of strategy in growing their automotive industry, and they've had decades of strategy in securing supply for batteries. We'll talk about batteries later. In the UK, we can't out-subsidize the US. We can't outscale China. We have a strength in the UK that I think is difficult to replicate. We have a strength in integration, in complexity. We're great at high performance vehicles, be that motorsport, it could be high performance road cars, it could be high performance off highway working vehicles. So we can't compete on certain areas, we can on others, and we should absolutely continue to play to those strengths. High volume passenger cars, we have some great companies in the UK that make millions of vehicles over vehicle cycles here. And one of the ways that Drive 35 is really trying to focus in on building scale, building an environment where companies can grow and flourish, is to make sure that there's enough demand signal from big OEMs that drive that. So that could be suppliers of widgets, it could be engineering service providers, it could be innovation companies, We need to be able to demonstrate that the UK is a significant player on the map. And I think that system around automotive, the connection into these different sectors of making things with vehicles, really shows that the UK can be an indispensable place. We're not going to be the biggest. We're definitely not going to get to the same scale as China. We're not going to be, I'd be very surprised if we got to a point where we're making very cheap city cars in high scale in the UK. I don't think that's where we can be indispensable, but we can be indispensable in places where we need complexity.
Interesting, isn't it? And I tend to agree with you, Dan, that it's not really about volume, which doesn't achieve the scale up. Our skill set often is in the more niche and bespoke arenas, which bring complexity because they're not run of the mill. They bring challenge, be it, like you say, off-road defense vehicles, motorsport vehicles. It's then turning that into scalable growth, because often those companies end up in that kind of, a lot of them in that sort of 5 to 10 million turnover place, which is great from a successful small SME. And often the brand punches well above its size, but it doesn't really scale into the kind of offshoot of capital investment that then really brings the growth that other countries often achieve with it. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it? That we're brilliant, but we're held back by the scale challenge of ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay. So going on to the next subject then. So in terms of pragmatic at 90% versus net zero, I've called it in my notes, but really looking at the two sides. Net zero is the intent, obviously, to decarbonize. And you mentioned just before we started the recording about recognizing that some things aren't necessarily going to be able to go fully net zero, and you're trying to offset it with other things. When I look at the net zero as a principle, it can drive a strategy that says anything that's not an EV, for example, in automotive is unacceptable. And there's people talking about HGVs being electric HGVs, which from a realistic engineering and capital investment point of view is a difficult pill to swallow as somebody with knowledge, easy to sell to people in the lay world, maybe. Are we sometimes trading off strategy to hit a net zero when really a 90% reduction allows for those incremental things like advanced hybrid powertrains to stay within some element of internal combustion engine, particularly in heavy goods and heavy duty vehicles, and take us forwards for things like e-fuels, sustainable e-fuels, which may still burn carbon, but if it's coming from the environment first, it's a sort of net zero contribution. What's the APC's position, and what do you actually think, Dan, yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, personally, I'm very supportive of ambitious goals that help drive change. Big challenge out there means that organizations industrialize and they produce solutions. APC, under the Drive 35 scope, we're very supportive of technologies that move us towards net zero. And there's a basket of goods there. On highway, we're really driving towards zero emission vehicles as a country. That's the priority of government and the focus. We also fund off highway vehicles in APC, and that's where we start to see some of these more interesting cases where when they're really hard to decarbonize. So let's stick to on highway at the moment. What I've been surprised with, so I've been at APC for 7.5 years now. I've been surprised at where battery technology and electrification technology has gone. And I genuinely believe we will see a lot more use cases that maybe 7 years ago we would have said, that's going to be really difficult to decarbonize, to move to battery, that will. And we'll do so with better total cost of ownership. Eventually, I think most passenger cars eventually will be able to be battery electric. I think, like commercial vehicles, eventually should be able to become battery electric. And indeed, some heavy goods vehicles. There's enabling factors, there's infrastructure, there's grid connections, there's charging, which will be a sort of pacing factor to the transition. But I think those are going to do it. I chaired an Auto Council report. Automotive Council is a body of industrial leaders from across the automotive sector and government as a forum to come together. And this report was on heavy-duty vehicle decarbonisation. Most use cases, with the right technology and with the right infrastructure and sort of enabling factors, could be decarbonised towards a zero-emission vehicle future. The area that was consistently difficult was off-highway. So that includes machines that are building infrastructure, like they don't have power going to them because they're putting those power lines in, right? Or certain agricultural applications where a combine harvester sits basically dormant for most of the year, then it'll have a few weeks of intense activity where it's burning like 2.5 tons of fuel a day, and then it goes back into the shed. I can't see a way that we could electrify those. Those are not battery electric compatible. Like, there's just no way that the physics work out for that vehicle type. So those applications are going to be quite interesting. For what else could we do? We're still going to need an engine in those. We're probably going to need to burn something. But what we burn in those engines could still contribute to a net zero economy if we're taking biomass and turning that into fuel and putting those into those very niche cases. So I think the overall approach to net zero has to be holistic. It has to be pretty broad, but it also has to challenge. It has to challenge us to think differently, and it has to challenge us to innovate.
Oh, thank you, Dan. I know when you look at it, really, you can look at so many applications and go, and I agree with you, battery technology, even the last 20 years, has come on a long way. And you can really see when cars start hitting 500-mile ranges and battery charging times can come down to much shorter, there is a future for much of the industry. It doesn't change the fact that as automotive companies have tried to meet legislative requirements of the EU and in the UK, they've been left stranded with some of the largest write-downs in their history. And I think as if Honda, even first time they've ever made a loss in their history, is writing down their EV programs and slowing a lot of them down. So the consumer demand, which ultimately drives commercial business regardless of what legislators say, has left automotive companies a little bit high and dry. And I think there's that kind of, I understand the difference between 90 and 95% versus 100% can lead to quite different solutions.
Yeah.
And it's that last 10% of diminishing returns where, like you said, there's the off-highway, but even on the highways, I know you're in a position in the APC where you've got a net zero policy and you've got to do that. But it's that ultimately a lot of companies are a little bit stranded, which then flows down into tier ones and tier twos, because if you're in private equity and you're an investor or you're a shareholder in those companies, you're trying to think, well, we all thought we were going this way, but all of a sudden we're not. You've got a lot of companies in Europe now saying, well, we're going to carry on producing diesel cars and petrol cars longer. We're going to have to negotiate. And where do we get to with that net zero challenge?
Yeah. So, well, I think net zero and zero emission are quite different things. So net zero, I think we are, it's signed into law. It's 2050. There's quite a long road to get to. Zero emission vehicle policy is much more short term and much more on the horizon. Interestingly, listening to much of the automotive industry through a recent SMMT event, the message was quite strongly that industry is still committed to moving towards zero emission vehicles. We might just have to change a little bit how we get there. And the targets written in the ZEV mandate are difficult. They have the potential to really hurt manufacturers and their supply chains. And what the industry have asked government for is greater flexibilities in there. So it's not saying we don't want to get to zero emission vehicles, because we do. We just need a recognition that the market hasn't quite kept pace with where we expected it to with the zero emission vehicle mandate. Having said that, I think that recently with the war in Iran, there has been a much greater interest recently in EVs. So at the end of last year, we were sitting about 22% penetration of EVs into new car sales. That's rocketed up to 29%. Since the war started, because people are seeing that price at the pump go up and going, I should probably have to think about this EV thing. And the same demand has been shown in the second-hand market for EVs. So I think consumers will move 100% versus 95%. Personally, don't think we should let perfection get in the way of the good. I think we can do a lot of good at the 95% level. And then there will naturally be forces that either enable those last 5 or 10% to move to lower carbon solutions. So that could be running an e-fuel or a biofuel through their engine, or they'll decide actually, the supply of fossil fuels is going down or becoming more expensive. That's now the point to look at something different.
I mean, I know huge amounts of people are very interested in this subject, as you are and as I am. In terms of probably the legislation driving the automotive companies at the same time, the consumer demand not matching up, combined with then really China having cheaper products being available that meet the legislation for those that do want to buy, I imagine it's probably caught Europe off guard, because you can almost look at a picture that says the UK and Europe could diminish their automotive factories on the basis that China's got the march on them all.
Yeah, it's really interesting looking at how China have innovated and continue to innovate. There's just a different approach to how you build and or develop and then build a vehicle. Whereas like a Western auto manufacturer would design a platform, release a vehicle, and kind of live with that vehicle for the next 4 years before doing a model refresh, and then another few years before redeveloping. What we're seeing the Chinese automakers do is they'll release something, they'll see how the market responds to it. If it's not good enough, they will re-release a new model. 12 months later, they'll improve, they'll innovate. They have designed their platforms, or they're willing to take the hit on what they've put into that first vehicle if the sales aren't on where they wanted it to be. And I think there's just something culturally quite different in that versus the way we know how to design vehicles in the West.
It's interesting, actually, as a topic, Dan, because it reminds me of the 70s when the Japanese automotive companies really scaled up what they were doing, and they had a different approach in terms of consistency and right first time versus end of the line quality issues that the Western companies did. And that subject matter is interesting from are the Chinese taking a different policy to assembly? Are they running much less fully automated? Are they running much more manual and semi-automated, which would allow for a quicker spin on a vehicle platform versus if you've invested, I don't know, 5 to 10 billion in a fully automated line, to suddenly change it on a dime is quite an exercise.
It is. I'm not sure. I don't have that information, but I do know that in terms of level of automation, China are investing very heavily in automation in order to maintain that sort of competitive edge on manufacturing costs and sort of speed to market.
One for us to investigate further is how they're running that, because that would be the way I would do it. I'd be thinking more of minimizing the fully automation down to semi and some manual, and then you can flip until you've got like you say, the commercial science to say this one's a success. And then you say, now we trigger the major capital investment in fully automation.
The other point I'd probably say on the China piece is that Chinese automakers have had a lot of subsidy over the past few years. That subsidy has suddenly been pulled away. And I think we're going to see quite a few of those Chinese automakers that have sort of sprung up that are quite reliant on subsidies start to fall away, and that is happening now. So we're seeing deep discounting of Chinese product in order for businesses to maintain their volumes and to continue to sell. I certainly don't think we're going to see an exit of many Chinese car companies from the West. I think we're always going to be under pressure. And I think that's another area that we need, as sort of Western companies need to innovate faster, reduce our time to market in order to keep up.
Yeah, I know that it's not for this. I wasn't going to go into it too much, but I know that there's a glut of Chinese manufacturers now, like you say, that have an overcapacity versus what's needed, which is presumably driving the Chinese government pullback of funding to some extent, which could mean, in theory, people end up with a car that no longer has a company that can support it with software updates and what have you in the future, unless you're betting on one of the big major players.
I think the big major players are quite visible.
Yeah.
BYD, they're a battery maker. They control such a lot of the supply chain, and they've invested so heavily in making cars. I can't see a BYD going away, for example. I think some others possibly will, but yeah, it'll be an interesting market to watch over the next few years. But certainly the challenge from Chinese automakers delivering very credible vehicles. For decades, you wouldn't buy a Chinese car, but now they are definitely having the appeal to consumers.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of when the Japanese did it and they weren't credible and they became credible, and then the South Koreans did it and they weren't credible and then they became credible. And soon Chinese cars will be extremely credible and it will be a different market, won't it? So on China, and let's go over into the battery glut as you sort of talk about, and this overcapacity piece, because I'm interested from where's the true state of things. And I think you were really keen on showing people that the world's got more battery capacity than it needs. I think numbers of like 2.5 times capacity or something like that I've seen. And at the same time, is it when other countries like ourselves or others, particularly we're interested in the UK here, is what would be the point in investing in automotive battery factories when China can just keep driving down price? Have they really already got the market in many ways? And therefore, are we better investing in things that aren't so easily done by China?
Batteries are critical to have close to your vehicle production. They're another thing that don't transport particularly easily or nicely. So having battery manufacturing close to vehicle production is key to holding on to that vehicle production. We are massively oversupplied globally on batteries. Nameplate capacity, so this isn't necessarily what plants are capable of producing today, but what they could get to. We're at about 5 terawatt hours, and our demand is about 2 terawatt hours. So yeah,
Wow.
we have this huge overcapacity globally. Where the UK can play, and we see springing up of some really innovative companies producing solid state batteries or very high performance chemistries that actually align quite nicely with some of the high performance applications that we need in the UK. So yes, they're probably not going to go into your everyday small city runaround car. But for the types of products that the UK makes, your high performance road going vehicles, the increase of electrification in motorsport, Formula E, Formula One, hybridization, we need some battery chemistries that are quite special. So that's certainly one area of investment. How do we make batteries that suit the high performance market? We need to be able to make batteries that support the volume manufacturers. So Nissan had the first gigafactory in Europe when it started making the Leaf. Some of the automotive transformation funding has gone to help Nissan expand, or Envision AESC expand their factory next to Nissan in order to keep um, to keep vehicle production up in the northeast with Nissan. Jaguar Land Rover, Agratas, we've supported Agratas with a small amount of funding in order to be able to secure battery manufacturing that will supply Jaguar Land Rover factories. Our calculations are that we need a third gigafactory to support the 1.3 million vehicle goal that we have as part of Drive 35. We're going to need another gigafactory, and that's just because of the location issue.
And do you see that that's always going to be the case, that we need those gigafactories to give us the supply chain here versus what could become a cost price war in terms of what China could offer for battery supply, albeit that it's got to come over on a ship?
Yeah, so where we need to get to, and one of the new focus areas of Drive 35 is in this sort of manufacturing competitiveness space. Previously, we were very much research innovation focused. Now we can move across different areas of the manufacturing supply chain and look explicitly at how do you make things more productively, lower cost, higher quality? How do you increase competitiveness elsewhere? We can't be in a catch-up game. We need to be able to find the leapfrog technologies. We need to be able to not just copy what China are doing, but adapt and develop something that works more in a UK plant, in a UK factory.
Yeah, and I get it. And your earlier comment about the motorsport piece and the different kinds of chemistries and applications. And I think, for anyone watching, things like sudden dumping of electric charge into a motor because you want a hit so big that you're going to rocket something along, and then being able to rapidly recharge that, maybe through regeneration, braking, and all those sort of applications. That's the kind of thing you'll be presumably talking about, which a traditional car battery on the UK roads in an EV wouldn't be able to handle, because it brings all kinds of things. You've got chemistry, but you've also got the thermal management of the battery to not make it just go, set on fire and burn, with just the amount of energy being pushed in or out of it in a moment. And that is an area that could influence quite a lot of our applications in the future, isn't it? If we really nail it in the competitive space.
Yeah, definitely. Does the price competition go away with China if you build it close? No, it doesn't. We still have to develop. We still have infrastructure challenges like price of energy, which repeatedly comes up in our discussions with industry about one of the things that we're struggling to compete on.
And of course, we buy in 80% of our energy from abroad as a country, so we're not in a strong position to control that price, are we?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a whole other subject matter.
Yeah, I'm sure that you'll have another podcast on energy at some point, Fred. But yeah, we're seeing glimmers of hope come through, but it's definitely a structural problem that needs to be addressed before we can realise this ambition of being a great place to scale without government subsidy.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. And there's lots of things we could discuss in that space, but we will go off topic today on that one, Dan. So, okay. So, it's been fantastic having you on, Dan. We're going to go through, just to wrap up really then. So this, design versus capture the manufacturing and the investment that really grows us. Any last thoughts on what, if you were looking at it from an investor point of view and thinking, where would I put my money? Where are people betting on right now that you can say they're betting on?
So I think spotting long-term value has got to be number one. What is sticky technology that's not easily replicated? What draws on a system of innovation, of organizations that isn't just a sort of copy and paste to whichever country you want to put it in? I think if we look at those types of areas where you can show there's something in the special sauce of being in the UK, of being in a particular part of the market. That's probably where I'd be looking to put my money. It's something that isn't just replicatable wherever. An organization has to have something that where value can be seen to be created over a long time, that it's low risk in terms of being that technology going out of date quickly. It's those sort of factors that I think we need to be able to showcase.
You said it quite well when you said we can't really go and try and copy countries that have already made it really cheap and really mass production. They're already doing that. We've got to keep ploughing into the being at the leading edge is really the only option, isn't it, at this stage for the UK in many ways, and probably Europe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so high value niches, software, I suppose the vehicle is becoming ever more software, and all vehicles are becoming ever more software driven. It's another probably, I'd say, a UK strength is thinking up the architectures and the softwares on that goes into it. Any other thoughts on terms of where we could be doing better with our capital deployment? And if you didn't have the constraints that both you have and the organizations that you're working have, where else would you be pointing people?
So absolutely. I mean, we have great innovation in the software space. We see companies spinning out from universities and quite quickly getting snapped up by international companies. So software capability, massive trend that we're seeing. As I mentioned earlier, we only launched Drive 35 last year, and already about 40% of our funding is heading towards software-defined vehicles and electrical architecture. These are things that the UK has an incredible capability in that I only recently found out about, sort of the amount of automotive software that's being written in the UK. Decision of global mobility companies to put our software development centres in the UK. Our capability with connectivity and automation. We're not going to be the winners in like robo-taxis. I think that's very much going to be US dominated, but we have another great capability of being able to work within complex systems, of being able to get quite niche use cases work together. So we've got some fantastic companies that are working in airports, bringing automated cargo vehicles. We've got a great ecosystem around ports, being able to automate those quite difficult sort of multi-mode operation port environments. And so I think automation and connectivity is one to watch in the UK, as well as our capability in more traditional automotive technologies.
Yeah. No, it's a nice insight there, actually. Thank you, Dan. When I look at it, sometimes I think of it's always a shame that we get the innovation, but when you talk about the foreign investment, it's great to get foreign investment in, don't get me wrong, but ultimately it means that quite a lot of our companies that we've put the innovation into, the profits after people's wages are paid go outside of the UK, and it's that kind of difficult position the UK's found itself in. So in a way that you and I can't answer, but it is an interesting juxtaposition, really, of investing in companies that ultimately get bought up, that ultimately take the profit away. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as a challenge.
Yeah, it's difficult. Right, we all have a sense of patriotism and want to have British manufacturing plants employing British workers owned by British finance. I think the reality of it is that unless we are attracting in foreign money, attracting foreign money shows an international significance. If you have globally mobile money, you don't put it in a place where you're not convinced that place has a right to grow. And companies that we've supported through previous APC projects have gone on to raise billions in foreign directed investment through acquisitions, through capital being put down. So rather than seeing it as a negative thing, we actually see it as quite a positive, because we are helping UK companies put themselves on the map, showing themselves to be internationally credible.
No, that's a fair answer to that one, Dan.
Well, thank you very much for having me on the show, Fred.
No, thank you very much, Dan. And where can people find you or look at your work and what you do?
Yeah, so we're very active on LinkedIn. Our webpage, I'm sure you can pop a link to it in the description. But there's a team of us at APC who are more than happy to work with industry to help them find the right funding product, to find the right opportunities in the UK. So we'd be delighted to have a chat with anybody who's connected into the automotive space.
And they're so going to be typically tier 1, tier 2 sort of supply types that are thinking about how to grow and probably stay in track with the electrification charge.
Absolutely, tier ones and tier twos. Where we're particularly interested to grow is in supply chain companies that maybe haven't engaged with government funding before. They might be tier 2 plus, they might be an SME in the UK. What's been nice about Drive 35 is that we can squarely fund things that aren't directly going onto a vehicle on an assembly line. We can fund much further up the supply chain, and we hope to use some of that £4 billion funding to really grow our industrial base in the UK, to strengthen the reason why OEMs are here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me. You've been watching Future Engineering Bits. I'm Fred Warner. We look at where in future innovation and product investment in advanced engineering should be in place. And if you're thinking about major capital allocation programs, then you'll be interested in this kind of material. So do tune into the next one. Please do follow and share, and I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you very much for having me on the show, Fred.